The big news out of France these days is that President Macron's controversial plan to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 years old was actually approved by the Constitutional Court here in France in April. And this has sparked numerous debates about French people's work ethic. And if you know the French, you know that striking and protesting, they're both part of French culture. Now, outsiders who live in countries where maybe the retirement age is higher than 64 think the French are lucky and they have nothing to complain about since they have it so good. Which begs the question we see thrown around again and again, are French people lazy? And that's exactly what we're going to get into in this video. All right, this is a huge topic, but let's just dig in. I want to tackle it first by defining what laziness means. Now, according to the Oxford Dictionary, laziness is, quote, the quality of being unwilling to work or use energy. And I need to say this right out of the gate, there are lazy people all over the world of all nationalities, including France and including the US. And I'm sure you, like me, you've encountered lazy people all over the world. It's not just a characteristic of people from one country. But with the recent news, it's definitely a question that's come up again and again in the media, as you can clearly see from these headlines. So does that stereotype depicting the French as lazy really hold any weight, or are they getting an undeserved bad rap? That's what I want to try to figure out. Now, I think to properly attempt to answer this question, we need to take a look at some context, a little bit of French history, and some facts about working in France. Now, for the record, France legalized the right to strike in 1864, and the reasons why the French go on strike are actually quite complex. So just know that there's a bunch of things that go into that, like the country's educational philosophy, things like unions, and a lot more all plays into that. But just know that the right to strike is in the French Constitution. You know, whether you're young, old, left-wing, right-wing, somewhere in the middle, rich, poor, all of that, all people in France strike. They have this right, and it's not something that's associated with just one type of people. It's nothing new. It's in their blood. And regarding rights, well, you know, in the US, people like to talk about their rights, things like freedom, the right to bear arms, for example. And the French are proud of their rights too, that they fought for and have in their constitution. They're just different rights. So in France, that right to strike and being able to rest in one's older age, that's extremely important, and they fight for what's theirs. Now next, to get into some hard data, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that is shortened to the acronym OECD going forward here, the average working week in France is 35 hours, and that was actually put into practice in the year 2000. Now, 35 hours a week is lower than the OECD average, which is 38.3 hours per week, and in the US, we consider a standard work week to be 40 hours. Now in France, that breaks down to the average French worker working 1,490 hours a year, with workers in the US doing 1,791 hours per year, just for comparison's sake. And it's clear that on average, the French work less than the OECD average of 1,716 hours per year. But does this mean that the French are lazy? Let's look at another statistic. The OECD also reports that the average productivity per hour worked in France is higher than the OECD average. And in fact, French workers are among the most productive in the world, coming in 25% higher than the OECD and EU 28 averages. And they've definitely nailed the whole working smart, not hard thing. So if French people are lazy, how can they be so productive, you ask? Well, one possible explanation is the concept of the work-life balance, which French, truth be told, does rather well. French workers value their free time, they prioritize it over work, and this is reflected in French labor laws that guarantee a minimum of 5 weeks paid vacation per year, and that is thanks to former President François Mitterrand back in 1981. And this is among other benefits like a work contract, parental leave, childcare, unemployment, and things like that. But let's not forget that productivity is not everything. French people also score highly on other measures of well-being, such as happiness, life satisfaction, health. This suggests that the French way of balancing that work and leisure time may actually be beneficial for overall well-being. Let's get into this retirement age issue. The French government's decision to raise that retirement age to 64 has been met with major criticism. You don't have to look far to see that. You've seen the news, you've seen the protests with trash piling up in Paris from several weeks ago. I really think it's important to note that France still has a relatively generous retirement system compared to other countries. In fact, the retirement age in France has been historically lower than many other European countries. Now, this change in retirement age is said to be a necessary adjustment from the president to address demographic challenges, things like an aging population and increasing life expectancy. But it's also worth noting that the retirement age is not the only factor that affects the labor force participation rate. Other factors, things like employment opportunities, education, and health, they also play a role. I also want to note that this 35-hour work week that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, it was implemented with the intention of improving the quality of life for workers, rather than promoting laziness, and also because the left-wing government at the time viewed it as a way to create more jobs. It's also worth noting that France has a strong tradition of labor activism and workers' rights. The country has a history of fighting for their fair wages, for reasonable working hours, for safe working conditions, and things like that. French workers are known for this strong unionization, and they are not afraid to strike to demand better working conditions. And this brings me to cultural differences that I talk about a lot on this channel. One of them is that in France, the French work to live, whereas in the US, Americans live to work. And there are reasons for this, of course, and systems that are in place that keep things the way they are. You know, the French are masters at living well and enjoying life, which is easier to do when you have a job contract. You have security, you have all these protections that come with it, like 5 weeks of mandatory paid vacation each year and health coverage. And regardless of your work status, you have that health coverage. In France, healthcare is a right afforded to all. It's not a privilege. So are the French lazy? Well, if you want my opinion as someone who's lived in France since 2012, the short answer is no. The French are not lazy. While yes, they may have shorter work weeks and longer vacation time and a more lackadaisical attitude, the stats show that French people are actually more productive than workers in other countries. And this focus on the work-life balance and strong labor right traditions, they've led to a better quality of life for workers and a higher overall productivity rate. And really, this whole video can be summed up as this. It comes down to this. France prioritizes people over profits, and it's so much easier to be more relaxed about work and prioritize this work-life balance when you don't depend on your job for healthcare. That generous vacation time is a worker's right, and it's not a benefit offered by a good employer. And when you have all kinds of employment protections that won't leave you without a roof over your head while you're working yourself to the bone, it's a lot easier when you don't have to worry about things like that. You know, those are just my thoughts. This is very much the tip of the iceberg. It's a complex topic, but I hope that what I've said here, it's given you some food for thought, and I'd love to hear from you below. If you worked with the French, what do you think? And in your experience, do you feel the French are lazy? Do you see a difference in the private versus public sectors? Talk to me about it all down below. If you're new here, be sure to check out my links. I have social media accounts. I have a free newsletter, all kinds of good stuff. I also have an e-guide that'll help prepare you for your trip to France. Maybe if you've never been here and you just want some extra tips. It's titled 75 Beginner France Travel Tips for a Standout Trip. That's linked below in the description. And with that, I want to leave it here for today. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you back on We in France soon. Salut!